when you think about mental well-being, so that continuum of how anxious I feel, what exacerbates that anxiety or what supports that anxiety, we see one of the main factors when it comes to climate anxiety, what's exacerbating it is that our social reality, so that our political response is not matching or commensurate to the climate reality, what we're faced.
Welcome to Climate 360. Today we're with Bronwyn Gresham. She is a clinical psychologist and she is the CEO of Psychology for a Safe Climate.
Yeah.
Welcome, Bronwyn.
Okay.
Can we start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey, not only as a psychologist, but into the particular area of how it relates to climate and climate change?
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction. And yeah, how to tell one's climate journey and one's life story, and possibly how I tell it today might be different to how I tell it on other days. But I, I, s- I ventured into psychology quite early, so I just was really interested in people and understanding people, and wanting to really just be a helper. I guess that was sort of like an original, very innocent sort of beginning. When I graduated, I went straight into community mental health service. I was really interested in sort of the more severe end of mental illness, and wanting to work in multidisciplinary teams, really on the forefront and really in community. It became pretty apparent early on that something felt missing. I began to notice this underlying edge or agitation around, we're investing so much in these individuals who are experiencing such extreme forms of mental ill health, but we're swimming and living in a system that's creating that. And so I began to be exposed to more systemic and more ecological ways of thinking about our experience of emotions and mental ill health. So
Mhm.
there was sort of like that sort of pathway was happening for me. But sort of underlying that is my personal experience. I grew up with a mother who became really concerned about the hole in the ozone layer. She was a nurse by trade and then studied as a horticulturalist, and so we grew up with this notion of Gaia, Mother Earth, the interconnectedness of all life, and the importance of taking care of Mother Earth, and Mother Earth taking care of us. At the same time, my father was a CFO in mining and mineral companies. So
Wow.
he was on the opposite political spectrum.
Mhm.
He was a liberal. He was also an artist. And, really later on in life, did a lot of literature and reading and art and exploratory sort of
Must have made
deep
for
thinking.
must have made for pretty
Hot
active
conversation. It's
hot
really
conversation.
hard-headed. So for me growing up, this conversation around it was global warming at the time was really heated. It was fraught. It was tense. It was like, I don't want to go there. As a young person, I loved both of my parents. I respected both of my parents. They both were role models in different ways. And so I wanted both of them to be right.
Mm.
But I knew deep in my bones that mum was right.
Mhm.
And I had lots of conversations with my dad over the years, and particularly in his, older, 70s and 80s, where he began to he would set bait for me all the time, and I'd take it, and there'd be like frustration, and I'm like, oh, it's so annoying. But as he began to, I guess, become more philosophical, more engaged with arts and literature and through conversations, and actually The Economist saying climate change is real,
Yeah.
all of these things began to sort of come to him. And he, I mean, just recently I looked through, so he's passed away. I looked through some of his old journals, and in them I found like a book Melanie Klein's book on capitalism.
Really?
And I'm like, so he was really beginning to get very quite dedicated, and his message to me in his later years was, um, you know, the thing that's really going to save us are the arts and creativity and innovation, imagination.
Wow.
Like we need care and love. And he's like, be bold, Brommy, he would call me, not Bronwyn or Bronny. I don't know where Brommy comes from. There's like, be bold, you know, go for it, follow your heart. You're on the right path.
So you had a bit of a kind of he had a bit of a Damascene moment of conversion to
Yeah.
what was going on.
Yeah.
And you were on a journey into psychology, and
Mm.
as you say, from a quite a broad perspective around the environmental
Yeah.
relationship between us, our mental health and well-being, and our bodily health and
Yeah.
the environmental health where
Yeah.
we live in.
Well,
Uh,
I think, sorry, what can happen for many people, and I think I've heard this story so many times in so many different disciplines and workplaces, when your climate awareness becomes really to the surface and you feel that drive to actually do something, because often it's simmering for a while. People know, but then they begin to align themselves with that knowing, is that they start to do things at work. So I was working for the Alfred at the time as a clinical psychologist, and I started a green group. I started Code Green, and tried to, educate. And it was really my first campaigning
mhm,
in environmental, climate change, sustainability awareness.
mhm, mhm.
And I tried to bring people in who are also aligned in that. And I think people from various professions start doing those things. They try to, add to their work and bring in sort
Yeah.
of a way to respond in that discipline or workspace.
Hmm, hmm.
Um,
So that sounds a little bit like, in a way, you joining the dots between things.
yeah,
Um, when did you first? When was it first evident to you that other people were joining the dots and coming to you already saying,
yeah.
"I have some mental health issue, and I think it's related to climate." When did you?
Yeah.
When did you first happen?
That to me started as a personal journey, I think, because when I started getting interested in active, I was going to quite traditional forms of activism. So, volunteering for environmental organizations, doing leafleting, doing climate for change conversations. So, really quite traditional. But for me, it didn't sort of, there was something missing.
Hmm.
And I was like, what can I, like, where is the emotional conversation? I remember doing the Al Gore training where there's, slide after slide on the climate challenge, and then slide on after slide on the climate solution, which, is meant to be problem and then hope. But for me, I was looking around the room, feeling the despair of it all, feeling the grief, feeling the horror. And
Hmm.
I was wondering, how is anyone else feeling this? Like,
Hmm.
how are people receiving this information? And then it wasn't until around 2012 when I found Psychology for a Safe Climate. I saw Carol Ride do a talk, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are other people who are thinking about the psychology of a safe climate. They're also thinking about, how do we approach this psychologically, relationally? Like, what role does that play in us absorbing this extraordinary existential information? And how do we, use that knowledge and way to actually support community at large to engage meaningfully.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it sort of, it took me down my own personal journey. I mean, my mum became, quite emotionally impacted by global warming. So I witnessed that. I felt it myself.
Hmm.
And then once I began to notice it within myself, I began to almost open up that receptivity for other people telling me
Hmm.
how they're feeling,
Hmm.
and revealing to me, in a very personal way, whether it, I'm having conversations, pamphleting, I was just available to have that conversation, to be like, how are you feeling?
Hmm.
And people would tell me.
Mm.
Um,
So some of the words you've been
Mm.
using around anxiety, concern, other words that have been kind of floating around grief, climate grief.
yeah.
There's Glenn Ulrich's term solstasia.
Mhm.
Could we maybe just briefly do a bit of map of what we're talking
Yeah.
about in terms of one, what are the difference between these things, or how do we define these things?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite subjects, strangely enough. It's flight, climate, emotions.
Yeah.
And hand in hand with that is just some, further awareness raising of just our mental health and well-being in and of itself, in my mind. So people are really familiar with anxiety. We feel anxiety when we anticipate something really challenging happening in the future, whether it's a school exam or starting a new job or having a difficult conversation. We're really familiar with that sense that can awaken us, like that, knot in the throat or butterflies in the stomach, in anticipation of something quite real happening in life. So when we're talking about climate anxiety, it's the anxiety that we feel in relation to the climate reality. So it's really variable. It's so dependent on who you are as a person, but it's really common because climate reality is real. We're talking about increase in disasters, current disasters being experienced by people, but also the awareness of what has caused climate change. Climate change is a symptom of something not working well within our society, within how we're relating to each other, to Mother Earth. And the systems are sort of enabling our Earth and therefore us, because we are a part of Earth. We breathe the same air that all life breathes. We drink the same water. Our food comes from the soil. Like our lives, our quality of lives are intricately connected to the health of Mother Earth. And so the anxiety people are telling us that they're feeling is not just about this sort of distant future of doom and gloom. It's about current and sort of in time recent experiences of major disruptive disasters. I mean, disasters are disastrous,
Yeah.
and so people feel anxious about that happening more and more, because it is. And in health, we think of like chronic illnesses and acute illnesses, and we in many cases think about acute on chronic, and that's what we're seeing in climate change. We've got this chronic change happening over a long period of time that disrupts every single system on Earth, including human systems. But then we have these acute periods of time of intense disruption. And then that is on top of a system that's already sort of not very life affirming, a system that increases injustice and inequity, that has an impact on so many outcomes, including economic outcomes, health outcomes. So people might be saying directly they're feeling ecological anxiety, like they're feeling anxious about storms or floods or fires. They feel anxious, for example, if they've been through a flood and it rains. So that's, one example of how it might show up. But other people might just be feeling anxious about, humanity.
Totally. And when you read or you listen to interviews, or you see things on TV and you hear someone talking about the big current there, the conveyor belt current that's slowing down, and that might maybe bring an ice age to Europe. Those kind of things. You begin to think, if someone's experiencing anxiety, is that like a problem to be fixed, or is it simply a rational response to what is actually quite
Yeah.
a crisis
Well,
moment?
and it might be both. So when we think from an emotional perspective, our bodies have many emotions. Like what we say, diversity is the norm. So we experience the world through our body, and we have so many different emotions. So anxiety is a part of that broad suite of emotional experience. So everyone on who's human will experience a range of emotions, including, feeling nervous or worried or anxious. Um, and so, it's a rational, valid response to hearing really something bad and difficult. And there's many other feelings and responses in that mix. But it's also can become problematic when we find ourselves so like that one emotion is dominating our system, where we've got no avenue for support to work through that emotion. There are things that sort of, like if you think about anxiety along a continuum, so there might be sort of like a mild sort of, it comes and it goes, all the way to it's really stuck and I'm experiencing it intensely and it's impairing my life. So we think about moving from, distress or, low mental ill health all the way to severe, like an anxiety disorder.
Right.
So what we do along that continuum is really dependent on what we need and what's happening in our life.
And in a way, I guess ironically, the more you get to that the worst end of things
Yeah.
is probably where you also become least capable to do anything.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we know is people get to that extreme end in the absence of support. And it's sort of, you know, the term anxiety and other negative emotion state terms has become pathologized. That anxiety is bad. We've got to move people from anxiety into something else, as opposed to like acknowledging that we exist in a state of a world that is anxiety provoking. And yes, we can try to, reduce that or get rid of that anxiety, but actually it sort of matches the situation. The climate reality demands us to sort of feel those things. We've known for a long time, for example, that facts alone don't move people. Just knowing the facts of climate change isn't enough. It's when we feel impacted by those facts, when we feel deep concern, despair, horror, that is what motivates and drives people to actually do something in their lives, to reflect on their lives, to think about who they can join with, to that's that passion that drives action. You
Yeah.
need the information,
Yeah.
of course, but you need to connect with it in an emotional way. And anxiety has become quite a popular topic to talk about because it's so common, and the literature demonstrates how common anxiety is compared to feeling, say, depressed or trauma.
Yep.
Post a disaster, anxiety trumps it all. But it's sort of beginning to think about anxiety as a piece of information. Like, this is part of the education for us as we evolve our emotional intelligence, is being able to be present with how we feel in our bodies, to put words on that, to name it. It might be anxiety, it might be concern, worry, agitation. There's all sorts of words that we can use. And then to figure out, well, what is it that I need to respond to this? What is this telling me about what is needed in this moment? It's very context specific.
So in a way, what you're saying that is that a degree of anxiety might be just the right amount to propel you forward to
Yeah.
do something and to
Yeah.
change the circumstances or contribute in some way.
Yeah. And perhaps anxiety, not by itself, like, we humans don't feel one emotion at a time. Anxiety is felt with other emotions. So it might be like a bit of anxiety, but for me, it's also a bit of courage. It's a bit of conviction. It's moral certainty or ethical consideration. Like, there are other things there that sort of are in the mix. Like, that's where the magic is. It's sort of seeing. It's like we need biodiversity in our world for a healthy, life-sustaining planet. We also need emotional diversity in our world.
Yeah, right.
We need this diversity to function and flourish. And I think there's been a lot of attention on some emotions but not others. In the media, we see like this triad of anxiety, despair, hope. And I think there's been, to the benefit, because it's provided some education on some of these things, but it's come at a cost of simplifying things. And sort of the reality is we feel many things, and we can feel many things all at once. And the important thing is learning how to be present with that and how to respond to that with compassion, with a deep care for our own self and system, as opposed to, I guess, dismissing anxiety as bad or despair as bad, or we have to, push. And that's just a cultural thing, right? Like, our culture's changing.
Yeah. It's one of the kind of ironies of the moment, in a way that I've seen kind of front page news, you might say, from both The Guardian, but also the Institute of Public Affairs, kind of saying the same thing, but with very different reasons. Basically saying our kids are getting super stressed by climate. Guardian saying because we need to do something about it. IPA saying because we need to stop talking about climate. And because our kids are getting so obsessed. So it's very funny to see how messages get used by different kind of sectors. I was interested to know from you, like, when you look at different countries and different demographics, the degree to which anxiety is playing at seems to be quite different depending on what generation you're in. And I'm interested to know what the kind of drivers are behind that. And if I give you an example, A crowd out of the UK, Climate Monitor,
Mm.
did a survey recently of 2,000 British people of different ages.
Mm.
And I was staggered to see that, not too surprised to see that for younger people in the 18 to 35 category, 29% had said that they had
Mm.
seen somebody
Mm.
about their anxiety in relation to
Mm.
climate, had
Mm.
consulted somebody. For 55 plus,
Mm.
that was 3%.
Mm.
That was 1/10.
Yeah.
So maybe if we start with the older generation, what do you think it is about the older generations that don't seem to be having the alarm bell ring in the same way as the younger generation? Why is that?
Yeah, it's sort of there's no simple way to answer that because there's a generational edge here and multiple factors that impact on a generation's well-being. So, for example, help seeking is increased over the generations because of so much campaigning and media around mental health awareness
Right.
and normalizing help-seeking behavior. So that could be in the mix.
Okay.
And same with just acknowledgement of, how I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Naming feelings, having feelings, being with feelings was forbidden for hundreds of years. We don't talk about our feelings, and some feelings are okay, but others aren't. So I think that there's some sort of like historical, very big cultural factors at play. For young people, I guess the other big generational difference between the 55s and, let's say, 25s is technology and social media. And there is a fair bit of research around the connection between this extreme spike in social media and all of the formulas that go into that to play on our psychology to keep us, addicted and connected, and then fed very particular information based on those formulas that the 50s, 40s, 50s and 60s, I'm only 44 and I wasn't exposed to that either. So that plays a huge role on the overall impact of anxiety. So there's some factors. The climate specific factors though is, for the 55-year-olds, they grew up in an era where climate change conversations were very polarized and very politically aligned. So climate change, it wasn't about the science or reality, it was about your identity. So if you believed in climate change, you were a greenie. If you believed in progress, you're a liberal. So to acknowledge the reality of climate change was a threat to one's identity or one's sense of self or what one has worked so hard to accumulate and accrue around, housing and products and, success. Like those stories and narratives were very strong in that era of growing up. Whereas now there's a lot of questioning around those stories. There's been lots of actual disasters that young people have lived through, and some young people, multiple disasters already in their lifetime, from drought to floods to fire. So they've been exposed to extreme weather events from a young age. But there's also a lot of education and exposure to information through social media, through schools. There's an increase in social emotional well-being information through schooling. And there's a change. I'm reading a great book at the moment. It's very old, called Parenting for a Peaceful World, which tracks the different types of parenting across the generations and how it's evolving. And so the evolution of our parenting is becoming much more empathic. We understand that children move through developmental stages, that punishment and punitive methods and, doing horrible things to children actually results in trauma and then traumatic behavior in adults. And so we're seeing a generation that has been impacted by trauma but is trying to undo and break intergenerational trauma. And I think there's so many things in the mix that come together to create these conditions. But I do think for young people, and we do see, there was another study by Hickman and others, 10,000 young people, including 1,000 Australians. I think it was 75% of young people felt a sense of doom about the future.
Wow. And so you're saying there, I hadn't quite thought through the scale of that impact. But as you say, the algorithms that lie behind social media and gaming and all these platforms, they are very much engineered around retaining eyeballs on screen.
Yeah.
And so you're saying is that there could be a compounding impact where there is a realization that this is causing both anxiety but also fascination, a kind of horror fascination. And therefore that's one way to keep eyeballs on that app, on that screen.
Yeah. And you can see like when you think about mental well-being, so that continuum of how anxious I feel, what exacerbates that anxiety or what supports that anxiety. We see one of the main factors when it comes to climate anxiety, what's exacerbating it is that our social reality, so that our political response is not matching or commensurate to the climate reality, what we're faced. So people feel that dissonance. They see it, they notice it. They're like, this is a major problem that requires dramatic, not just incremental change, but transformational changes. We've got to, remove air pollution and fossil fuels. We've got to, remove, carbon from the atmosphere, but we've also got to repair and replenish and heal the biodiversity, our nature. All of these things are needed, and that's transformation. And young people who are switched on to the climate reality know that, but they don't see that response happening in adults.
Yeah.
And so that exacerbates anxiety, because it's sort of like if I were given a diagnosis of a severe health condition and told just to drink some herbal teas, it's not commensurate. It's like what I need is actually time and space to process that major life, health condition. I need information on the treatments available, evidence-based treatments. I need options. I need, people to discuss that with. There's a whole thing that needs not just herbal teas and,
Yes.
it's a learning curve of learning like about this issue, but also what happens when people learn about it is they realize that where our current systems are hindering or blocking, and we know this from the, one great example is the fossil fuel lobbying that has been proactively dismantling attention on this in that systematic way, and has been drawing the attention back to the individual, gaslighting the individual, saying just, change to an electronic car, put solar on your house, which are all great, important individual changes, but they're for the privileged. That's actually not what's going to bring us back into a safe planet.
It's a very good point, because it goes to the issue of what is individual responsibility, what is collective responsibility. You can see with younger people that there will be a compounding frustration, not only with not seeing your own view of the world being reflected in the behavior of others, but also if you're under 18, not effectively being able to do anything about it in a political sense. So you can't vote one way or the other. So you're seeing this thing unfolding, which you think is dramatic. You're seeing your elders not treating it as very dramatic, and then you realize you've not much you can do. So I guess a question, Bronwyn, is what does action look like from the perspective of psychology when you have someone coming to you presenting with significant eco anxiety, where they're at that point of blockage, where it's all encompassing and they can't move forward? It would be nice to be able to say, just go out with a placard, you'll feel better, although you might get arrested. But genuinely, what are the different types of action one can take, and what's the levels of efficacy depending on different kinds of action?
It's this is also such an important element, is discovering how to support yourself and move through this world. Before I answer that, I'd just love to just rewind quickly.
Sure.
To acknowledge, yes, for under 18-year-olds, it is more challenging, and that is why parents and teachers play such a crucial role. So parents and teachers being on their own climate journey,
Totally.
fumbling through these questions, these dilemmas, being really real and authentic and human about that. Acknowledging that we do live in times that it is difficult to make changes. The systems aren't supporting the changes that we can make as individuals. So I think the more that parents and teachers are on this journey and role modeling how you try to make sense of this complexity and honor the hard stuff, that has ripple effects, that role models back to children. That's what supports kids. I
Totally.
just wanted to
No, no,
aim that because I think it's really important, and that's empowering to see that parenting or educating or even hanging out with your children in ways that demonstrate that how you can connect with nature, how important it is, how you're grappling with these issues is so protective of their mental health and well-being when it comes to
Oh,
climate.
I can't agree more with you. In fact, actually, I think there is a missing piece in the puzzle here where there may be avenues of support for young people as they go through this, but in a way also for parents.
Yeah.
I know that myself and my wife, we use the dinner table as literally a chaise lounge to lie down and say, "Did you believe what that person said today? And have you seen that HY graph? And have you?" And
You just think one of these things where you just to lie back.
exactly, and you unload all the stuff, and then by the end of it, you haven't fixed anything, but you're a little bit lighter
You are.
because you shared that with somebody else, which is
Exactly.
what having a community,
Yes.
is about.
Yeah.
But the thing is, Bronwyn, that we've started to realize after 1 to 5 years that our little kid, he's 10 and then 12 and then 14, he's sitting listening to us relatively unfiltered, talking about great Atlantic changes in sea temperatures and about, the great deluges and droughts and the way the world is going to transform. And then we kind of started to think, we'll have to hold on to this conversation until he's in playing his game, next door,
Absolutely.
with the headphones on, and then we do.
Try to be considerate of. It's the same with me when I'm in the car with my 9-year-olds. I'll switch off the news because it's traumatic to listen to. Actually, most news, there's no child-friendly news that I've found. So I totally appreciate this. We're sort of trying to figure out what's appropriate to share and what's not. And I mean, this is why we have at Psychology for a Safe Climate cafes. They're gathering spaces of 15 people, so very small. They're emotional conversations. They're not about problem solving or fixing or more action. They're literally spaces where we can tune into how we're feeling and we can try to make sense of the complexity together, because it's not how you're feeling is not your fault. It's not caused by you. You're not doing anything wrong. You're feeling this way. It's a collective problem and they're collective feelings. So it's sort of like it's a much more public health experience.
But let's get back to the action.
Yes, let's do that. So for so long we've heard this motto that the antidote to anxiety is action. And there's some truth to that, particularly with really severe mental health conditions like anxiety, that to face what we feel fearful of in incremental, safe ways to take action is really beneficial. Or if we're feeling like stuck in a depression, engaging in pleasant events and moving and sort of doing the opposite of how we feel is really beneficial. So action it's certainly helped me as well. Joining community groups, climate action groups, joining rallies, just even tending to my garden. All of these things are actions that have supported me and do support people. But what we know is through talking with a lot of people who are engaged quite actively is that it's not enough to lay anxiety. I don't know if you've noticed that. Like no matter how much action you take, actually, you can still feel very anxious and despairing and hopeless. So action is not sufficient. It's a part of the mix. And what can happen because we've got this big unrelenting problem. There's, for many people working in the field, unrelenting workloads. Like there's never enough that you can do. And that there's all these barriers in place that impact on the efficacy of a campaign. So sometimes we get in this treadmill of action. And if we take this step back, we feel guilt or dismay or despair at I feel bad that I'm not taking action.
I was going to say, because you mentioned earlier about this kind of pivot that the fossil fuel industries have done to say, why don't you get on an EV? Why don't you put PV in you? on your roof. And the downside is that for a lot of people, that those capital outlays just aren't there. And so it can actually seems to me it can almost have a negative effect,
Yeah.
which you say, if only I can take action,
Yeah.
sufficient action, if I can get to sufficient action,
Yeah.
I will allay my anxiety.
Exactly.
But then you say, but I'm still driving my engine car.
But that's because the problems, the cause of the causes is still there and unchanged.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's some research that backs up this experience that we've observed for like the last decade of working with PSC by Panu Pakala, who's a Finnish researcher. So they
PSC is
Psychology for a Safe Climate.
Right. Okay.
So Panu Pakala, along with others, was asking the question of, okay, we're going to feel ecological grief, we're going to feel anxiety. What are the things that we need to put in place, remembering that it's a continuum, to prevent that from moving into the psychological distress, mental ill health part of the continuum? How do we just, what do we need to sort of sit with this anxiety or grief and, prevent it from escalating or really significantly impacting us? And they distilled it to 3 key areas of importance of intervention. And one, of course, is action. And for us at Psychology for a Safe Climate, we have adapted that to regenerative action. So action on climate must also include ways, moments of reflection, of quiet, of, connection, of deep thinking, of visioning, imagining, rest, because that's part of life cycle, right?
Yeah.
Responding and being life-affirming action, so regenerative action, but that's not sufficient or commensurate to prevent mental ill health or, really intense Ishmael anxiety. The other two are what Panu Pakala called distancing, self-care. So essentially being able to be like, okay, this big problem exists and I also need to tend to other elements of my life right here, like playing with my kids, tending to something that brings me joy, engaging in play, being outdoors, moving. So these are all the sort of like what we call the ways of well-being, which are really well-established pieces of information. What makes us flourish and keep us well, learning, being active, connection, so on. And so we at Psychology for a Safe Climate also include collective self-care. That's why we have climate cafes, for example. And then the third area is emotional engagement, including grieving. So there's a lot to grieve in the world when we begin to learn how much humans have transformed it, how many species are going extinct and are extinct, what places that we love that, our own journeys carry us through that we feel connected to that have changed, or places that we might have wanted to share with others. There's a lot of grief. And so emotional engagement is about having deliberate spaces where we can, personally, like in my own time through reflection or art or creativity, but also with others. Like the important part is the doing this with others. And we're now seeing like an increase in awareness of this over the past few decades, thanks to trailblazers like Joanna Macy, who have offered communities practices and ceremonies. First Nations people in Australia have been doing ceremonies and yarning circles for thousands of years. So there's sort of foundations there in the fabric of our cultures that we can tap back into. But we need those we need to prioritize it and to have to validate and normalize that this is actually a part of responding to the climate crisis and making sense of this complex, confronting mess is actually connecting with the grief of the places that we love. It's feeling the despair, it's feeling the hopelessness and finding a way through that with meaning and purpose.
Would you say, I mean, there's that classic, I don't know if it's still kind of currently taught, but the 5 stages, the denial,
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Are they as relevant in relation to grief for climate?
They can be, yeah. So sometimes when I'm working one-on-one with people, I do offer different models that they might tap into. Yeah, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief can be really important. The one we use at Psychology for a Safe Climate is Woden's 4 stages of grief, or 4 processes, or 4 tasks actually is called, of grief, which include, turning to the reality, like actually acknowledging that it exists, feeling the impact of that, trying to figure out how you integrate that impact into life, and then creating some meaning, and sort of it's almost like deconstructing and then reconstructing who we are, because while we're waiting for the system to change, we need to also be doing that sort of decomposing the things that aren't serving us well, like hyperconsumption, for example, like constantly, such a common example, going to, shopping or gambling or alcohol to feel good, beginning to sort of see the inherent challenges in that, and rediscovering what actually does bring us joy and connection and security and love.
Yeah.
So deconstructing and reconstructing. So we like that 4 stages, or the 4 tasks of grief. That is what it's called.
So if I can summarize, you said that there's a role for taking action.
Yep.
And in the different ways in which action can be taken.
Yeah.
There's giving yourself space to do the stuff that gives you joy.
Yeah.
Going for a swim or a cycle or whatever. So kind of like, in a way, setting it to one side, saying, for the moment, I'm not going to be fixing climate. I'm just going to be doing the stuff I like. And then the third is this idea of giving yourself space to grieve in whatever way you need to grieve.
Yeah. I wonder if it's almost like the using that like a nature metaphor, and I'm just sort of thinking of this on the fly, so let's like make this up together. But there's something about just tending to our needs, our very basic core human needs, is like, putting the nutrients in the soil that we need. And then, taking action is like planting the seeds of change, because one action is never going to solve it, but we can plant seeds of change. And then tending to them is like the emotional experience, the meaning making, the reflection, the purpose, the continuing to think about, like, how do we navigate this, which is how we blossom.
It's important to think of that, how we blossom, because one could think, well, crikey, the question of grieving, when you grieve, or when I grieve when my parents passed, there was definitely a time when that passed.
Yeah.
I don't grieve anymore. That was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's past. But in a way, the conundrum we are in is that we are probably going to be grieving this for a long time to come.
I think that's where it's sort of like, it's helpful to see some similarities, but also to honor the differences. And so there's sort of, it's very acknowledged in society that we can grieve for people, and increasingly for animals, like lost pets. And yes, so there sort of is this idea that over time, time heals. Yeah, for some losses, I would say it doesn't necessarily, for like more traumatic losses. It's still difficult. But yeah, with ecological grief, it's not been acknowledged as a valid grief for so long. It's been like, oh, you're just too sensitive, or you're a greenie. Like, it's been disenfranchised is what people often say.
Yeah.
It is, and because of that, we have an absence of process and ceremony and ways to meet that grief. And this is where responses like Climate Cafés or programs like the Good Grief Network, 10 Steps on Climate Grief, or Joanna Macy's The Work That Reconnects. They provide places and practices for people to actually step into the grief in a safe way together, rather than being left with it by yourself. Like, one of the biggest factors for poor mental health is when we're left by ourselves to feel our feelings. We know that, like, the most protective factor is feeling validated, feeling seen. I'm hearing that others, oh my gosh, this is not a problem of me. Like, the problem of one is the problem of many. Other people feel this way too. Like, that is the most common thing we hear from a climate cafe, is the immediate sense of people feeling less isolated and more connected.
Hmm. I mean, so that, I mean, that's kind of why you have friends to some extent. You get
Exactly.
together
Yeah.
and that you share your
Yeah.
worldview, and they
Yeah.
are your friends because you share a degree
Yeah.
of your worldview,
Yes.
and it has a positive sense. Just getting back to that kind of generational difference, and I take your point that there may be other factors as to why that 3% for 55-year-olds
Yeah.
plus. I
Yeah.
take your point. Nevertheless, in the context, I'd say in an Anglophone world, or at least in the kind of Australian, English, and American context,
Mm,
one thing that's different from the rest of the world, I have to say,
mm,
I won't go too deep into it, but
mm.
is the dominance of News Limited,
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
particular media organization that has taken a particular interest in demolishing
Mm-hmm.
climate action for a long time. Now, I don't know whether you've come across this, but obviously that those mastheads tend to have a generational profile as well.
Yeah.
You only have to look at who writes the articles to
Yeah.
tell that
Yeah.
probably the people reading that are men in their 50s, and
Yeah.
60s, and 70s.
Yeah.
Um, and one thing that I've heard happening
Mm.
is basically families being slightly torn apart,
Mm.
where an older generation, partly because of all of the embedded differences of how you
Yeah.
are in the world and
Yeah.
what you do with your emotions and the importance of industry and economy and those things, but also reinforced by certain kind of media outlets.
Yeah.
Have you come across that where
Yeah.
kids, grandkids, parents, grandparents, there are these divides happening down these kind
Absolutely.
of
It's
lines?
like one of the common conundrums that people bring into not just climate cafes, but into therapy if they're coming into therapy around ecological distress is the disagreements, the tensions,
Mm-hmm.
just the sense of not feeling connected to their relative
Mm-hmm.
because there's no space for this issue for minds to meet minds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and it does create, yeah, disconnection,
Yeah, right.
people having to walk away. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
their sense of futility of you can't even you can't change a skeptic's mind, or the skeptic can't change the other person's mind. And we've I think generationally still getting skilled at how we find common ground and have difficult conversations,
Mm-hmm.
because difficult conversations have been politicized.
Mm-hmm.
They've been merged into this dichotomy, and we're trying to move away from dichotomies, but we still live in a dichotomous world of good, bad, right, wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right, you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm wrong, that's an affront to my identity. So I have to hold on to it with my dear life. And we've got all of these psychological processes that then really cement that in, like confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
We actively seek out things to confirm what we think and believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot going on there, and it takes a lot of skill for
Yeah.
people to have nuanced conversations. And there's no systems way for families to have that support to engage in those conversations. I think one of the biggest things that we could do to support children to face this reality that they're going to be living into, and support the parents and the teachers, is to have intergenerational programs that support them to have conversations like this.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of other models out there around, like kitchen table conversations, climate conversations, um, that help that. But there's nothing. It's not embedded into the curriculum. It's not offered at
Mm-hmm.
scale. It's for the rare few who are really interested and already invested and probably already having
Yep.
relatively good conversations. We wrote a great book actually, many, many years ago, with Psychology for a Safe Climate, called Facing the Heat, which spoke to some of the relationship challenges
Mm.
that we had noticed at the time. We wanted to share some of our stories of
Mm-hmm.
those interpersonal conflicts that can happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because what's interesting when you say when you said that about right and wrong,
mm,
and the moment you feel like you're in the wrong, that's an affront to your integrity. Of course, the one of the layers in climate change is that if you are of an older generation, and you've been around a long time,
yeah.
and if you identify that actually having a V8 probably wasn't a great idea, having a five bedroom
Mm,
house probably wasn't a great idea, and
mm,
having the levels of consumption that we have, and
mm,
whatever. So then the moment you acknowledge that we're in a situation where potentially our children, our grandchildren are going to have a tougher fight on their hands than
yeah.
we had, then you also have to layer in guilt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the moment you say, actually, all that is right,
Yeah.
not only am I wrong, but
Yeah.
I'm guilty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, there's nothing wrong with guilt.
Mm.
It's part of the repertoire of our human experience.
When you grow up Catholic, that's a
Yes.
that's a
No,
that's a difference.
it's so true. You're so true. Your story of guilt
Mm.
depends on your upbringing and the stories that you've heard around that, whether it's permissible or
Yeah.
not.
Mm.
And this is part of that big broader emotional awareness campaign that we need to have in society, is trying to like unlearn a few things and stories that we have about particular emotions, and we each carry different stories for different emotions.
Yeah.
Mine's more with
Yeah.
anxiety and depression. Yours is more with guilt. I didn't grow up Catholic, so I
Yeah.
don't have
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It's a
So we can
lifelong
learn
burden.
from each other, but guilt, by function, like highlights to us that something isn't morally feeling right,
Mhm.
that something has transgressed an ethical boundary,
Mhm.
that we feel guilty, that something, and so it's sort of like a signal.
Mhm.
What when it can become like again to that continuum of being probably unhelpful guilt, is when we have a heightened sense of responsibility or guilt, or when the guilt is not commensurate to the responsibility of the person who's accountable. So at the moment, this is why a lot of individuals feel gaslit by politicians and the fossil fuel lobbyists, is because they're holding more guilt than they should be holding,
Right. Okay. Mm.
because the
Mm.
fossil fuel lobbyists and the government isn't taking responsibility commensurate to the problem. So they're sort of in some ways psychologically casting off that guilt
Yeah.
onto the
It's
individual.
your fault because you're still driving the
Yeah.
car.
There's
Not
a
our
really
fault.
great paper by Blanche Burley who writes about that type of gaslighting experience,
Mhm.
that we can
We'd
share.
love to put her on the show notes. You mentioned a couple of times the Climate Cafe. So tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about that. Give me some details.
Yeah.
Where does it happen? How do the good folks find out about
They're
it?
happening all across the world, but in Australia, Psychology for a Safe Climate started Climate Cafés a couple of years ago, led by one of my colleagues, Christy Wilson and Sally Gillespie, and the team,
Mhm.
Beth and Carol.
Mhm.
And essentially, they're very intimate spaces. For us at PSC, they're feeling spaces, so they're not oriented towards problem solving or actions. We've got enough of those spaces around.
Yeah, what?
They're purely spaces where we can practice tuning in to how we're feeling, and sharing that with others, and then listening deeply. So when they were getting developed for us within Australia, there was a lot of deep thinking about our context. At the time, there was a lot of bushfires had just happened, so there was a lot of trauma in the field around that. But also acknowledging our colonial history, intergenerational injustice. There was a lot of sort of thinking about how do we take an anti-oppression lens and a liberation lens to this sort of
Mhm.
modality.
Mhm.
And it's a very simple model. Like, people gather, they share how they're feeling, and then we close. We have sort of some safety group guidelines.
Mhm.
But I ran one yesterday actually, and a participant in that really just sort of nailed one of the primary functions of it. They said almost within, the first 20 minutes, they felt an instant sense of a reduction in isolation. And then they commented, it just seems like isolation is sort of happening
Mhm.
by the system. Like, it's
Mhm.
almost like it's on purpose that we're meant to feel separate and isolated.
Mhm.
And feeling spaces are almost like an activist way of resisting that,
Right. Okay.
bringing to the surface that this is not okay. We shouldn't be left alone to figure all of this out.
Mhm.
And meaning making happens collectively. Transformation, societal transformation. Climate change isn't about this. It is about the climate, but it's caused by people. This is a people problem.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And so, these climate feeling spaces are just very precious.
Mm.
We know that there's not many spaces people can just show up and just share what's on their mind and listen deeply. And yarning circles have been around for thousands of years. We know they function to support connection, to support understanding, and those things protect our mental health. So we really see climate cafes as a way to protect people's mental health,
Mhm.
to keep them in that end of the continuum where you can experience emotions and emotions well,
Mhm.
and to prevent the psychological distress, or sort of impairment that can come when you're stuck, when you're not supported.
Mm-hmm.
But we also see them as a way to distribute this emotional care and skill building back into community. So they're not led by mental health professionals per se. You don't have to be a qualified mental health professional to facilitate a climate cafe.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have some skills in facilitating and being good at listening and tuning into group process.
And presumably diffusing heated moments, but a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes, or sometimes it's about there's permission to have heat.
Mm.
There's very rarely like
Look.
you know, moments of harm in a climate cafe because they're so well set up with
Mm-hmm.
the group guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the common themes that comes in that I've noticed and that we did a review on our climate cafes was that dialectic between individual and collective responsibility, was people feeling
Mm-hmm.
just the futility of them continuously recycling or
Mm-hmm.
showing up to everything for everyone
Mm-hmm.
with the but what's happening collectively, like where is the responsibility, like so this sort of like trying to grapple with those two seemingly opposite ends, and the other one of course being around despair and feeling like miserable, and all the way to like seeing and being connected with the thing like the glimmers of
Mm-hmm.
hope
Mm-hmm.
and things that are progressing and moving in the direction that we want them to, and it's
Mm.
sort of being able to hold both, like both are all emotions are welcome in a climate cafe.
So there's a kind of a, for want of a better word, there's a kind of format. There's a kind of a set of tools about how you can do that, and if you take that on, you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
So there's it's a
Yeah.
growing community.
We really encourage that. So we've been, obviously we can only run so many. We run monthly ones.
Mhm.
We support youth focused ones with another organization called EcoMind. And we provide climate cafes specifically for people working or studying or volunteering in the climate movement.
Mhm.
So that's where we will see a lot of, from researchers and climate scientists to
Mhm.
people working in sustainability and biodiversity to people campaigning on climate, fossil fuels, like
Mhm.
a real big mix. So
Mhm.
they're the ones at PSC we run, but then we do, when we're invited into community, support those communities to learn these peer support, emotional, collective group skills
Yeah.
so that they can, and that's been working really well with various organizations coming to us wanting to have it as part of their, well-being organizational support program, all the way to just communities, groups like Divers for Climate or Parents for Climate wanting to sort of learn about how they might integrate, climate feeling spaces like climate cafes into their cafe.
So you said there are organizations that
Yeah.
what kind of organizations
Yeah.
take this on board?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, for us, a lot of them are climate movement organizations. So, organizations working in the environment sustainability. Increasingly, we're seeing councils be very interested. So, we do get a lot of reach out from particularly councils who have climate emergency plans or are thinking about climate adaptation and mitigation within their area, because they're noticing that their people are impacted by that work.
Of course, of course. I mean, the risk of, I guess, burnout must be so ever present. I read,
My.
only listened the other day to someone who was involved in marine ecology on the Great Barrier Reef,
Yeah.
and hearing her talk
Yeah, it's
about
heartbreaking.
coming one day and seeing just this gray sludge of
Yeah.
dead matter
Yeah.
where it used to be, you could just see
Yeah.
how, and she talked quite openly about uh grief, the grief of that, and how to get over that. But anyone involved in the earth sciences, you think,
Yeah.
probably are having to encounter those situations.
Absolutely. Because they're exposed to the depth and the breadth
Yeah.
of, and they're witnessing it firsthand. Like it's not just vicarious. They're not just hearing. I mean, some of it is vicarious. People listening to community members' stories of how they impacted by cost of living or rising insurance bills because they can't insure their house anymore, all the way to people who are, on the front lines, or people, like that marine scientists. And we've worked with people, along the reef around reef grief. And, a colleague Yolanda at Divers for Climate. So there's an American study that came out that analyzed, I think, around 230 organizations or individuals within climate movement organizations, and 96% of them reported symptoms of burnout.
Mm.
And many people feel like burnout is an individual problem because you're the one who feels burnt out. You feel exhausted, cynical, fatigued. You just like you're burnt, you're fiery, and you're out. You're exhausted. But burnout actually isn't a mental health condition. According to the World Health Organization, it's an organizational phenomenon. So it occurs when the conditions of where you are, whether you're parenting, that's your workplace, or whether you're in an official workplace, when the stresses and demands of that work are not met with the supports that are needed, whether it's poorly mismanaged. So you think about the climate movement, people working in this field, there's unrelenting work to do. So there's high workloads, there's vicarious trauma, there's exposure to witnessing disaster and being part of that disaster. The 80% of Australians reported being impacted by an extreme weather event since 2019. That's a lot of the population.
Wow.
And 40 to 1 are the odds of experiencing mental health compared to being health impacted. So the mental health impacts of directly being impacted by a disaster.
Say that last figure.
So the experience of mental health distress following a disaster is 40 to 1 compared to health impacts.
Really?
Yes.
Like for every one person who feels health impact,
40 people feel anxious, depressed,
Wow.
traumatized.
Wow.
So it's a huge, of course, and that doesn't just impact you, because mental health and physical health is not, you're not an island. When you're first, how you feel. And so burnout is the result, it's like climate change, is the result of underlying causes and conditions of how we're working and how our work is supporting us. So as a parent, that's my workplace. If I'm not feeling supported to parent, I'm going to burn out.
A lot of what you've been talking about is the kind of ways and means and methodologies for approaching the subject in a way that can be positive, in a way that can return a degree of mental health to people.
Yeah.
I'm interested in there's the term toxic positivity.
Yeah.
How do you understand that idea of what it is to be positive and what it is to be something other than that in that context of
pessimistic?
no, I mean the kind of
like a healthy positive,
almost
dose of positivity,
kind of Pollyanna, like that it'll all be well. That's something that's quite interesting, that you as much as it's good to see beyond the troubles you have. I'm just trying to understand how we think about the word positive in the context of climate.
Yeah, and it can be such a delicate word. It's so subjective. And I think what I've noticed for people who have been in the field for a long time, sometimes positivity can feel fraught. I think what I've been noticing is if there is like positivity becomes toxic when the actions that we need to still make the change are then not done.
Right.
So sort of like greenwashing, or, so when we're sort of told that this is going to help, but actually, like Keep Cups, for example, but now you see the hyper consumption of Keep Cups and like the waste, So it's sort of like, that's the toxic positivity is sort of like, she'll be right. It's all going to be okay. Therefore, we don't actually need to radically change anything because it's all positive. I can't tolerate thinking about the harm or the damage or the problem. That's toxic positivity when it's very rigid. And I mean, positivity and negativity are two sides of the same coin. I could be really pessimistic, but I could be toxically pessimistic and not actually see how things are transforming and changing and how people are responding. I could only see like everything's futile and humans should just not exist at all. So both of them require a level of what I've learned, in understanding this from my colleague Beth Hill. Both of these sides of hope, hopelessness, positivity, pessimism require a sense of certainty. Like, I know how it's going to end up. It's going to end up okay. Or I know how it's going to end up. It's going to end up not okay. So both of them rely on knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is we humans actually don't know quite a lot.
Right. And
We live in uncertain times. None of us have a mirror ball.
mm-hmm.
Like, none of us have clear, absolute predictions of certain futures. And this is the beauty of determination and free will and the capacity for the unknown to emerge. Things that we don't even know yet will emerge. So it's sort of holding. There are some things we do know that we're on a trajectory because science is telling us that, and we're observing it with our own bodies and eyes and minds. But there are many things that we don't know. And so this is where, that positivity, negativity, hope, hopelessness is important to be aware of, but also sitting with uncertainty,
Is okay also.
acknowledging the humility in that, being open to the emergence of how life unfolds and how evolution happens is also a really important part of the mix.
Well, we're almost out of time, but maybe if we could finish up with one general question or one overall question. If there's one thing you could say to someone who was feeling that they're struggling with their mental health in relation to climate, what would be the one thing you'd want to let them know?
That they're not alone in that struggle, that everything that they feel makes sense, and that we're here to understand that. And there are things that we can do to support you through this.
Hmm. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put the details online, and maybe there'll be more climate cafes in the near future. I hope so.
I hope so too. Thank you. So you'll have to join one.
I will. I definitely will. I feel like I want to go to one right now. In fact, actually.
Well, let's have one right now.
I don't suppose
Right,
alcohol
it's
is
your
at
climate cafe.
a climate cafe, is it? You can't get a whiskey at a climate cafe, can you?
You might be drinking it in your coffee cup.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you for joining me today. Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers. So great conversation with Bronwyn Gresham. A number of takeaways from that, and for me, the number one takeaway, not surprisingly, given we're talking to a psychologist, was the degree to which our response and how we understand climate is, to some extent, is governed by knowledge about information, statistics, temperatures, and volumes of things, etc. But to such a large extent, it's governed actually by um, our psychological and social and cultural way of engaging with the subject, which is to say, in some ways, it's almost like it's bound up in our identity politics. And the clearest example of that we talked about was the generational difference there, where there's a generation that I guess was raised with the idea that national security, prosperity, family health, and a range of these kind of like relatively conventional things were the number one thing, and anything that threatened those big levers, as it were, was a baddie, and somehow climate is seen to be threatening those big things, and that's a deeply. It's not to do with numbers and information. It's to do with an attitude. And so, therefore, if we are going to talk about climate and we're going to try and engage people around the subject of climate, we all have to take that into account. We can't assume that we're talking frankly to rational people. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And even what would a rational person even be? And I agree that the thread that came through from her sharing with us that it was realizing that we had this onslaught of existential information coming at us collectively. And she went looking for the conversation about how we all going, how we dealing with these big ideas, these big scary ideas, and just couldn't really see that there was much of a public resource or public forum for us to process these things together. Yet there are so many resources that are available from what we've learned, both over tens of thousands of years, but also over more recently with contemporary approaches to clinical psychology. And that was as a sort of a broad brushstroke, but then using identity politics as the example, realizing that actually at the surface, we all know the political debate, but what's going on under the surface is people are finding that their understanding of who they are is being challenged, and that's big for anybody on either side. And if you go into that discussion acknowledging that, perhaps there's more space for people to meet each other and listen to each other and come up with something new together. So
Mhm.
yeah, it was really fantastic, empowering to have that agency foreground.
There were a number of analogies that she brought into the conversation that I thought were particularly useful, and one was this idea when you talk about people feeling stress and feeling you know uh, feeling the impacts of the climate discussion, not even the climate itself, but the climate discussion on their psychology. And as she identified it, it's a kind of cognitive dissonance there, which is to say that people are following what's happening in the climate. They are considering it to be a very major thing, but it's not being responded to adequately. And the way she describes it by analogy is the idea of going to the doctor, and the doctor tells you you've got a major health issue and sending you home to drink herbal tea.
Mm.
So that in a way that you have this completely inappropriately small response to what is actually a very big thing. And that in itself, that cognitive dissonance, is what creates a lot of poor mental outcomes for people.
Yeah.
And of course, what she talks about is the different ways we can break down this complex territory through different approaches to treatment and understanding our psychological system, let's say, and things like Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, or what she talked a lot about, Horton's 4 tasks of mourning. These are strategies developed by people who work with this stuff all the time. And I think for people listening, we've got stuff in the show notes, but it's really important to know that you're not alone, and nor do we have to just ping between these, what does she call, a trilogy of hope, despair, and optimism, that we're actually much more complicated than that. Which is, and we should welcome and embrace that complexity.
The Climate Cafe really struck me as a great way to not only create a safe port of call for people to go in and understand that they're part of a shared experience, but also to propagate those skills through the community and to remind us that we can be there for each other, that there's all these other more institutional ways of getting support. But to me, I was really uplifted by the idea that we can also increase the community capacity to work together and perhaps create more space for us to have constructive discussions with very different points of view and come up with a third point of view that works for us, that is progress.
So that's the last of our 6 conversations on climate positive, the different ways in which we can approach the issue of climate change with a positive approach. And now, Sam, we're moving on to a new series altogether, aren't we?
We are. We've been busting to get onto this one because it's such a dense and exciting area of activity, which is energy. We've had incredible people are joining our program to discuss what they've been doing, what's working, what's not working, some of the challenges ahead, and we're really looking forward to sharing that with you.
And we're hoping to keep our foot on the nerd button, so we can manage. Everyone can join this journey. You don't have to know too much, even though it is quite a complicated territory. But yes, we're going to get into that next. So we'll see you then.
See you then.